Welcome to Lieven and Marcelo's Criminology podcast, a podcast hosted by Marcelo Aevi from the University of Lausanne, Switzerland, and Lieven Pauwels from Ghent University, Belgium. We aim to draw a map of the state of criminology across Europe through the words of contemporary criminologists. How is criminology defined and taught? Which are the main lines of research? Which are the main schools of thought in each country? These and many other questions are answered here by fellow researchers who share their vision on the development of criminology in their countries from its beginnings to the second decade of the 21st century. If you want to know and compare their stories, stay tuned.
Today we are interviewing Professor Marc Cools. Marc Cools is Professor of Criminology at Ghent University and is specialized in the study of private security and historical criminology. He formerly worked at the Free University of Brussels. He was a member of the organizing committee of the 2019 edition of the European Society of Criminology conference in Ghent. This interview was conducted on 3 June 2022. Okay, welcome Professor Marc Cools to our podcast. Just in general, to remind you of our goals of our project. The goal of our podcast is to try to retrace the history of criminology in different European countries as a way of creating a collective memory. So basically, we are conducting interviews with criminologists in different countries, people who have a lot of experience, and we try to reconstruct the history of criminology in each and every country by allowing people to talk about the history from their personal perspective. So it's important to realize that you don't need to elaborate on everything. It's your view, and we are interviewing several Belgian criminologists. So the key idea is that if we interview different people, we get a view of how people who are working from different perspectives view criminology in each and every country. So what we have done is we have prepared some questions, and we sent these questions to you. So you have a broad background. So from this background, I think you can answer our questions from your perspective and your specialization. So I would like to start with a very difficult question, but a general question. What is your view on the way criminology can be defined in the Belgian context?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the kind invitation, and already my congratulations for the initiative, because I think it's very important to recollect the history of criminology as a science, which is taught in Belgium, but we come to it in different universities. If we try to look for a definition of criminology, I think, and also my generation, most of us who studied criminology started with a law degree, undergraduate law degree, because criminology, as it was created in Belgium in the 30s of last century, but I will come back, because in Belgium there was a typical start within the state in itself. It didn't start at the universities. So the major topic in criminology, and criminology was for a very long time seen as a science which could help the criminal system, the penal system, and I will come back to it, especially when we will talk on the institutionalization of criminology in Belgium. I think today we shifted, and the shift was made in the 90s. And I think the proper definition of criminology, and a very basic definition, is criminology in Belgium is studying processes of criminalization is studying the reaction on crime, especially on policing, what is happening in courts. But next to the criminalization, reactions on crime, of course, there's a lot of interest in the etiology. Why do people commit crime? Why do people don't commit crime? So I think criminology in Belgium has a very traditional definition, but today, and in my course Introduction into Criminology at Ghent University, now I do refer to the definition of the European Society of Criminology. I think that's a general view on what is criminology today. So on that question, today, I think everyone refers to what the ESC brought as a definition, but in Belgium with a long history in law faculties as such. And that brings us also to the institutionalization of criminology. And the institutionalization of criminology started in Belgium within the Ministry of Justice. And why? You know, Belgium, we were on the front line in the First World War. And after the armistice in 1919, we created a new police, the judicial police. In Dutch, de gerechtelijke politie bij het parket van de procureur des konings. In French, police judiciaire, du parquet du procureur du roi. And at that very moment, already in 19, they decided that you should be educated until you're 18. So it was, a higher education. But those policemen and officers had direct contact with magistrates which were formed at universities with law degrees. So at a certain moment, the Ministry of Justice took the decision to create a school for criminology and criminalistics within the framework of the Justice Department. And so those agents, officers of the judicial police could follow a higher education in criminology. In the 30s, the initiative was taken first by the Université Libre de Bruxelles, because they were interested in criminology. And the tradition at the ULB, and you should remember, Adolf Prinz was a professor there, social defense. So it was broader than just criminal law as such. So the ULB started, followed by Leuven, and especially for our proper university. The first IDs in Ghent started in 1936. At that very moment, it was Nico Gunsburg, who was a professor at Ghent University. And he studied what was happening at Brussels University, Leuven University, but he was also looking abroad. So in 36, he mentioned to the faculty board, at Ghent, we need a school, an institute for criminology. And so at Ghent University, it was realized in 38. So we had an institutionalization within the Ministry of Justice, afterwards followed by the universities in the law faculties, and the criminology departments today are still in the law faculties. So it was Brussels, Leuven, Ghent. On the other side, because Brussels at that very moment was a French-speaking university, Leuven, Louvain, it was bilingual. Courses were taught in Dutch language, in French language. Ghent University taught already in the Flemish or in the Dutch language from 1930. So, and then of course you see a shift in Belgian universities, that the Université Libre de Bruxelles created a Dutch-speaking university, Vrije Universiteit Brussel, and from the very beginning, they also had a criminology department. We saw the same in Leuven. Leuven split, and the city of Leuven is the Dutch-speaking university. They created a new one, Université Catholique de Louvain, in another city. And so Also the UCL from the beginning at the criminology department. What is so typical for Ghent? Ghent was a former state university, and the opposite, or the colleague, the French-speaking colleague, was the University of Liège. And they only started with the institutionalization of criminology just after the Second World War, 46, 47. So it means today that our criminological institutions are in 6 universities, 3 Dutch-speaking, 3 French-speaking. What did we saw in the new universities? Take, for example, the University of Antwerp, the University of Hasselt. They do not have criminology departments, but in general, it means 6 universities with proper criminological institutions. If we go back and we concentrate, and it will also, or I will also refer to it when we do speak on key challenges, you really see the disruption between the Dutch-speaking criminology, the French-speaking criminology. That Dutch-speaking criminology is often using English as the standard language. Do see the membership of the European Society of Criminology. Most Dutch-speaking criminologists are member of the ESC. But on the other hand, we do have the Association Internationale des Criminologues en Langue Française, the AICLF. And there we see colleagues from ULB, colleagues from UCL, colleagues from Liège. And it's a real disruption if you go into the journals, the Dutch-speaking criminology, especially Panopticum, for example, Panopticum, which was created already in 1980, and it was a common initiative from Leuven, Brussels, and Ghent. On the other side, you don't see a Belgian French-speaking journal. They go into existing international French-speaking journals. So when we do come, and the big change in criminology was in the 90s, and the undergraduate, the bachelor, as we said in the past, it was the candidate's degree, 2 years of law, 2 years of psychology, sociology, and so on. The older generation is really formed from a theoretical point of view. When I was at the university in the beginning of the 80s, we never had courses on statistics. We never had courses on doing research, not quantitative, not qualitative. So the basic entrance was, of course, law, sociology, psychology, and afterwards, when we moved, and especially due to the reform in Europe with bachelor, master's degree, PhD, we did see an influence from other sciences. From our own perspective, I have always been interested in economics as such, how is the market functioning, and so on. And of course, and you know, you have the rational choice perspective as a theory with a kind of economical reasoning behind. I do think that criminology missed. There is no such thing as criminology and economics. In the Anglo-Saxon world, you see psychology and economics, law and economics, sociology and economics. So we do not have that kind of evolution. But I do think that economy can be seen as an entrance to criminology. The same we do see with history. It was also beginning of the 80s that some Dutch-speaking criminologists said, okay, we should go into history and use the science of history. Nowadays, it's accepted. You have a lot of colleagues who are working on the history of criminology, criminological history, and so on. So I really think there are generations in Belgian criminology today. My generation formed within law faculties as such. And today, okay, due to the reform, bachelor, master, PhD, with a lot of stress on how to conduct research. We didn't do research. We spoke with people. We interviewed. We observed things, but we were not trained in proper research techniques and methods. It also meant that the teaching of criminology was very classical. You had your curriculum, you went to the aulas, professors did their story, but it was piecemeal. There was no general idea behind, due to the fact that in Belgium for a very long time, we had a difference in degrees. If you studied law, it was so-called a legal degree, which meant that the state defined what you should have as courses. Take a science as criminology, it was a scientific degree. So the universities by themselves had a lot of freedom, liberty in order to stress on that kind of courses. The result of it was that criminology in Leuven, criminology in Brussels, criminology in Ghent, and opposite Liège and UCL and ULB, we didn't have one program. Universities had their freedom. Of course, it had some consequences. And in my opinion, and I go back to two state universities, Ghent, Liège, the two state universities were created on the initiative of King Willem I, the very moment when Belgium and the Netherlands were together, that we were the United Kingdom of the Netherlands. In the northern part, there were three state universities, Leiden, Groningen, and Utrecht. And so he saw to the south and he said, I only have the Universiteit Leuven, which was a Catholic university. So he took the initiative to create two state universities, Ghent and Liège. The fact that it were state universities had an influence on the education, the training of police people. At a very moment, Belgian state took the decision, our officers, which we formed for the gendarmerie, in Flemish, the Rijkswacht, the first 2 years, the undergraduate, they went to the military academy. After 2 years of military academy, the Dutch-speaking were sent to Ghent, the French-speaking were sent to Liège, and they had to follow, the education, scientific education in criminology. Afterwards, they went back for 1 year into a military institution. In reality, it meant, and I think you still see it today, that the research in Ghent and the research in Liège are very policy driven. We are working, we were always satisfied to have research projects from the Ministry of Justice, the Ministry of Interior. It doesn't mean that we were not that critical, but not critical from a strict critical criminological approach, which we still see, in my opinion, at the UCL, we still see it at the ULB, less at the Vrije Universiteit Brussel, but nevertheless from a critical point of view. So I think you can observe a distinction between the old state universities and the Free University of Brussels and the Catholic universities of Leuven. It also has an influence on the topics we are researching. When we do speak on, for example, a topic on policing, police studies. In the past, we had some excellent professors, Bryce de Ruiver, Paul Ponsaars, who were really in Belgium, the specialists on Bryce de Ruiver on criminal policy, Paul Ponsaars on policing. We had the opposite in Liège with André Lemaitre, Georges Kellis at a certain moment. If we do look to Brussels University, and it was the influence of Chris Eliards, for example. He was very interested in prison, penology, the rights of prisoners. And today we can state that de Vrije Universiteit Brussel is very good in penology, studying of sentences, prisons, alternative sanctions, and so on. When we look at Leuven, Leuven as a Catholic university, with close links, of course, to the Catholic institutions. Catholic institutions who were very involved in education, but also in care for victims, care for perpetrators. And so you see that notions such as restorative justice, yeah, they are quite familiar in Leuven. So the institutionalization and the typical situation of Belgium due to the languages, but also from a philosophical and religious point of view, created other schools of thought. And I do think that you can still see it today in the topics which the Belgian universities are really teaching as such. Today, what are some theoretical influences? One of my critiques, and it's a French word, la pensée unique. Everyone has to think on the same way. It was never the case in Ghent, and it was never the case in Liège, because by definition, they were pluralist institutions. You could go from psychology, you could go from biology, you could come in from economics, from history, which you don't see that much in the other universities, due to the fact that there was a reasoning behind. For example, both Brussels universities, as they say in libre examen, free thinking, okay, there were no taboos as such, but they really went into research on human rights. What is the position of perpetrators, of victims, and so on. So if you come and we can add and discuss on it to key challenges, I think on the institutionalization, I don't see in the future that the younger universities, the new universities, for Antwerp, for example, they will not start with criminology. But they did start with studies in security and safety. So if criminology should not existed and universities today would start with an interest in, they would concentrate on security, safety. And that's the reason why Antwerp University does have a education on security and safety studies. But the classical criminology, as defined from the very beginning in the 20s and the 30s, just until today, they will stay as such. Is there a challenge in collaborating? I don't think so. In the past, and I give you an example, you have the European Society of Criminology. You also have the Belgian Society of Criminology. But the Belgian Society of Criminology, it evaporated, it disappeared. There are no longer initiatives taken by them. But on the other hand, it was Ghent University, Brussels University, and Leuven University who created the Flemish Society of Criminology and the Vlaamse Vereniging Criminologie. The initial ideas were to bring the three universities together in the benefit of young researchers. And I do remember the first initiatives. The first initiative was taken in Ghent, Brussels followed, Leuven followed. There were a lot of young researchers, but it also evaporated as such, perhaps due to the turnover. And the presidency was Ghent, then it went to Brussels, then it went to Leuven. There was also a shift in presidents. There was also a shift which university should organize the event. And the last initiative taken, we had to cancel the conference because there was no longer an interest in it. So, does there exist a Flemish criminology? No, it doesn't exist. And the society still exists, but now it's up to the new chairman to take initiatives, whether it will be successful or not. On the opposite, and I also spoke on it in my introduction, is the real disruption between the two parts of the country. Dutch-speaking criminologists concentrate on English, do not follow what is happening in the Francophonie, in the French-speaking world. In the French-speaking world, they are not really following what is happening in the Dutch-speaking criminology. Some of the colleagues are still members from the European Society of Criminology, but it's a minority. Nevertheless, European Society of Criminology had a very good conference at Liège University, but also there, we were confronted with the fact that there's a lot of French-speaking issues as such. So I do think that's also a challenge as such. Another challenge is who is going to fund the research. In the very beginning, it was quite simple. It was split to the different universities, for Brussels, for Leuven, for all of them. So there was no real competition. Everyone agreed with the fact, okay, when we have research on prisons, it's a Brussels issue. When we come into policing, okay, Ghent, Liège, and so on. Nowadays, also with the expansion of criminology in Belgium, and the expansion, we see it on the number of students, we see it on the number of professors, we see it on the number of researchers. We also see it on the number of the members of the ESC. As such, Belgium is there a leading country, but it also means that the budgets for research do come into a competitive system. And when there is competition, okay, the limit of budget, but on the other hand, those who receive research funding, in my opinion, are on a higher level due to the competition. So I think that's a challenge as such on fundamental or research sponsored, paid by the Belgian state. If you come into the research of the classical departments, interior, justice, they are cutting down their budgets. It's rare that you can do research directly for one department or for another department. Sometimes you see, it's also typical for the Belgian state, from the very beginning when Belgium was created, we put the political power as low as possible. So the mayors of a system, they are in charge of the police. And now you see some mayors, take for example Antwerp, take for example Mechelen, take for example Liège, when they do need criminological research, they do go to their proper universities. So it's also a challenge on the limiting of budgets and the shift from the federal state to more local communities as such. The research in itself, does it have an influence on policies? I do think so. And I take, for example, Ghent University. At a very moment, I take, for example, Paul Ponsars. Paul Ponsars, as a criminologist, was working for the Ministry of Interior, directly for a Minister of Interior. Bryce de Ruijver was a member of the cabinet of the Prime Minister. I, for myself, at a very moment, worked for 4 years on the cabinet of the Minister of Justice. So you take into consideration your proper criminological knowledge and also your proper views on what is criminology, what are the basics of criminology. And I do think that we had an influence. Take, for example, the reform of the Belgian police. Everyone will agree that the job was done on the research at Ghent University, Bryce de Ruijver, Paul Ponsars. I created a network in, it's called Belgian Intelligence Study Center. We tried to study our intelligence services. It was not researched in Belgium, Now, for more than 10 years, we do have conferences, we do have books, which does have an influence on the policy, of course, because nowadays, Belgian state security, for an example, but also military intelligence, they say, okay, we need to collaborate with the universities. They are not all against it. So you can bring new topics into the criminological market, but you can have an influence on policy. On the opposite, if we see the prison system, rights for prisoners, you do see the impact from Leuven University, from Brussels University. So I think criminologists can have an impact on the criminal policy in Belgium, if you want it. Because if you stay on the other side and do state, I'm a critical criminologist, I do not want to work for state, I don't need that kind of budgets, okay, I think your impact is limited, because it's always a smaller and smaller niche in la pensée unique. You can be as critical as possible, but you will never have an influence. So I don't really see it as a challenge, but yeah, you can state it as a fact as such. If we come into the programs in criminology, it's often a discussion, I think, for all universities. We do have a lot of students. And now you can ask yourself the question, how does it come that we do have so much students? I also think that there is a shift in how we see to crime. In the very beginning, it was crime as an issue, but from the 70s, 80s, the 90s, criminologists, but not only criminologists, also policymakers, also the public opinion, also journalism, they said, oh, it's not only crime as such. Some people do have a concern for crime, do have a fear for crime, and there were some tools which were used. Is it really a problem or not? From crime into feelings of security or insecurity, we added the notion of incivilities and les incivilités, behavior you don't do, but it was very disturbing for citizens. And today, and especially after 9/11, we included the notion of threats. Terrorism sometimes was a research topic, but nowadays it's terrorism, it's extremism, it's radicalization. So you also see a shift in the topics criminology is dealing with. And I think a next shift will be the notion of hybridization. You cannot split crime from threats such as terrorism or extremism and so on. You see some links between organized crime and terrorist organizations, or ordinary, between brackets, crime. So the hybridization will be an issue. And we see the interest at Ghent University. If you study criminology at Ghent University, in a very moment in your career, students can choose, I'm interested in organized crime, I'm interested in drugs, I'm interested in sexual crime, I'm interested in financial economical crime. And I think that's a very good evolution, because when I started as a student in the 80s, I learned a lot of things, but I never learned something about the phenomena of crime. It was always the reaction on crime, the etiology of crime, but we never had courses on organized crime, sexual crime, and so on. And that's a real shift you see. You also see it at the University of Liège. You also see it in Brussels and Leuven, that the phenomena as such is important in studying criminology. So I think I gave an overview based, Marcelo and Lieven, on your questions, but I do feel free if you have some specific topics or some specific questions as well.
it was really a complete overview. And now we can go perhaps by slices, but yeah, we had all the subjects treated. I would, yeah, one thing that is a little bit surprising for me, and very positive, is that you work for the cabinet, for the government in developing criminal policy.
Yeah.
And you're not the only one in Belgium among the criminologists who has done so. How does it work?
Yeah, if we see to Belgium, and we have our elections, of course, they do form a government, but there is a basic, and it's also the same in France. There is a basic distrust between the minister and his administration. So in between, they put a cabinet, and the members of the cabinet, the collaborators, the direct collaborators of the minister, are chosen by the minister himself. And so some ministers know up front, I already knew in 1998, and the elections were a year afterward, that Marc Verwilligen already asked me, if I do become Minister of Justice, will you come to my cabinet? I said, of course I will come to your cabinet as such. It was the same, Paul Ponsard, for example, working for the former Minister of Interior, Louis Tobac. So very close links direct to the policy. We had the same with Bryce de Ruijver, even on the cabinet of the Prime Minister, where Bryce was coordinating what was happening at the Justice Department, Interior Department, what was happening in the Defense Department. So it's really a layer put between a minister and his proper administration. The consequence is that as an individual working directly for your minister, you do have influence on the political game, on changing what is possible and not. I remember at that very moment, the government said we need a federal idea, a federal plan on security. So I wrote it for the minister. It was accepted by the entire government. It was even accepted by the Belgian parliament. There were some critics on it, but 20 years later, everything or almost what we put in is realized today. So as a criminologist, and if you want, and if you also, if you can't stand the heat, stay out of the kitchen. So I also have some critics from, it's a liberal view on crime, it's a liberal view on criminology, but nowadays we are moved 20 years, and almost everything is realized or as such, and they are still using the same frameworks. Unless it was a more liberal social democratic government, today is the mixed government, they are still using the same principles. And that's, I think, typical for Belgium. And you have the same with other colleagues coming from other universities, close links to political, ideological views on crime and criminology.
I don't think that is well known outside Belgium. I knew it for discussions with colleagues, because and then nobody writes about that, because I can understand that, okay, it will be a little bit self-praising, this is what I did, but at the same time, it is a pity that it is not well known, because, for example, when people talk about what criminologists do, and there are some books, there is a book, a Canadian book, Professor of Criminology, this is never mentioned, and
there is one PhD at Brussels University by Christopher Failly, and he was really, interviewing, and I helped him. He interviewed the ministry, he interviewed a lot of members of cabinet, how he perceived it. It was the same with the PhD of Elke de Vroo. She also interviewed people, politicians, people who were working at ministerial cabinets. but also in Belgian political sciences, there are not much publications, there are not much research projects on the influence of a cabinet. A cabinet means close, direct collaborators of a minister. You have the system in France as well, but I was also interested in that kind of research, that kind of who is doing what. In France, you often see the discussion. In France, you sometimes have the discussion. Some of them do say criminology doesn't exist. Why it doesn't exist? Because it's not a profession, and you cannot go with the criminological education into the labor market. Okay, others, they do say, yeah, you can, but then you're very close to politics. For example, for a very long time in France, they had the Institut National des Hautes Études de Sécurité et de la Justice, full of scientists, and with a direct impact on the policy. But the majority of French criminology or sociology say, oh, no, it's too close, too linked to politics. I think in Belgium it's more open to say, okay, this is what is happening, and you can have critique, of course, and you can have scientific critics, but due to our political system, criminologists can have a huge impact on what is happening.
And that's it's quite incredible. And but these PhDs, they are written in Flemish or in English?
I think he wrote it in Dutch, but he was preparing a publication. But I will check it.
Yeah, it's difficult because if you interview people in one language, then to translate this, but it is something that it's good to know, because, for example, this institute in France, they were doing a good work, and now they disappeared like that from one day to the other, and nobody knows. Of course, you could use their publications, but nobody pay attention to explain, okay, we're having this institute that's having this impact. Then you could use it when they try to eliminate it.
Yeah, because in France you have the Cahiers de la Sécurité et de la Justice with profound research in it, but it was put in a corner. It was so linked to the government, to interior, to police, to gendarmerie, to the prison system, that it's not that spread, for example, in Belgium. Not a lot of Belgian criminologists who do know that there is a very good line of production of French research close to, and it goes back to the discussion, governmental criminology, non-governmental criminology of such.
Yeah. And just another question in this same topic about criminal policy. You know that in Switzerland we had these heroin prescription programs in the 1990s, and then in Belgium also for a few years you had these programs. And I was wondering if that was the influence of precisely of criminologists to introduce these programs. The thing is that also, the results, I think it was the University it was a French university that did Liège, I think. They were working on the evaluation. So the results are not very well known, and the program did not last, but I was surprised that it was introduced as such. Do you have any idea of that program?
Yeah, what was happening, and you can call it also security, safety, contracts, pacts. At the very moment when Louis Taubac, he was a social democratic Minister of Interior, we saw on the political level that far right was coming up, and far right claimed the issue of crime. They always spoke on crime, and what we need is severe punishment, more prisons, people. And Louis Taubac, and it goes back, I think, to also the theoretical views of left realism. There is a crime problem. Let's speak on the crime problem. And so the Ministry of Interior invested in safety, security, prevention plans for communities, if they want it or not. And they created a proper department in order to evaluate it. And afterwards, you see the institutionalization also of that kind of approaches. Big cities, Antwerp, Ghent, Brussels, Liège, Charleroi, today they all have their proper services who are dealing with prevention and so on. So the state put money in it, evaluated in it, and today you see an institutionalization, but on the lower level of the cities and the communities.
Okay.
And it's also an influence, and there it was Leuven University for the Dutch-speaking part, and Liège for the French-speaking part.
It is quite impressive. And another question on a different topic. You already have a PhD in criminology.
Yeah.
So when they started the PhDs in criminology?
Okay, if I go to my proper university, yeah, I studied at the Vrije Universiteit Brussels, and we go into the PhDs. You had Chris Eliarts, Sonja Snakken, Willy Bruggeman as a police officer, and I was number 4. So in the beginning of the 90s, at that very moment, yeah, Chris Eliarts and Sonja Snakken, they really opted for a career in academia. Yeah. Willy Bruggeman, an high-ranking officer in the gendarmerie, he said, I need it for myself, I need it for my institution. And it was the same for me because I was not working at the university at that very moment. So I did a PhD as an investment in myself. But the boom in PhDs, that really came, I think, more after the Bologna reform, when we really went into bachelor, master, PhD as such. What is one of the topics, my vision, that today as a university, we put a lot of effort in PhDs. We put a lot of effort in good researchers. But on the other hand, we are also educating criminologists who will never go into an academic career, who will never go for a PhD. But it means that we also have to form, educate very good criminologists, because if you go into the labor market in Belgium, in the very beginning, they went to the police or they went to the prison system. There is a shift today. There are criminologists in the private security. There are criminologists in the intelligence services. There are criminologists working on the level of cities and communities. So there is a labor market for criminologists, and we do need to take care for both group of students. Those who really want a master's degree in criminology to be in the labor market, to be in the field, and on the other hand, the good researchers. But at the very moment, we see a lot of people with a PhD, and they can't always stay at the university. So they also go into the labor market, and you see them in the same places. You see them in the private security industry, you see them at the interior, you see them as justice or as experts for policy makers, which makes, in my opinion, Belgian criminology as a leading country in criminology, not only due to our history, but also to the fact that we followed the evolutions from a scientific point of view, but also from a societal point of view, from a political point of view.
Yeah, quite impressive as evolution. So in the 90s, you already had a PhD?
PhD, yeah, 93. So next year it will be 30 years already.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, in Lausanne, it was also in the 90s, but compared to other countries, it's really, I mean, it's quite impressive. I always see the number of Belgium people from Belgium in the ESC conferences.
Yeah.
It's quite high. But some things, I have the impression that are not as well known as they should be outside of Belgium.
Yeah, if you take the structure of Belgium, and some critics, they say, oh, Belgium, it's an artificial country. You multiply everything. And that's true, of course. When we do something in the Dutch language, the French will follow, or the opposite. due to the religious history, when there is an initiative by Catholic universities, the state universities will follow. And that's also the reason why today, in a small country with a limited number of universities, we have 6 institutions for criminology on the highest educational and research level, namely at the universities. If you go to France, for example, you can follow one course, Introduction into Criminology, but then you are not a criminologist.
We get a lot of, we get some students from France precisely because of that, because there is nothing. And the number of students that you have is, you have hundreds in the first.
The first year, so this year, in more than 600 students who are really starting the first bachelor. And
only in Ghent?
Only in Ghent. I think Leuven will go to 400 perhaps, Brussels will go to 200 or 300, so there's a huge entrance in the field of criminology.
And then for the masters, do you have a numerus clausus?
No. We do not have numerus claususes, which means that we, in the northern part of the country, we do often have students coming from the Netherlands, because they have a numerus fixus, as they say. And they try, for example, at Rotterdam University, Leiden University. But they are not allowed, so they do come to Belgium.
So they go from the
Netherlands
to Belgium. Yeah, quite. Perhaps something that we have discussed with Lieven in our own discussions. Also, perhaps that many of the things were published in Flemish, in Dutch. It's not as well known as it should be, because
yes, true.
The change to English, when there was this change to publish in English?
Yeah, when we come in, and it's one of the interesting questions, of course, the shift in generations. So most research I did, most publications I did it in the Dutch language. But on the opposite, I also published a lot in French, because I was trained with my second language in French. That's also the reason I'm a member of the IECLF. I'm not native French speaking. I learned it as a second language. But the real shift, really, and I always go back to that Bologna reform, that English became the scientific language. If you come to the younger generation, their English is much better than mine. But on the opposite, if I should ask the young generation, can you write it in French? Because in Switzerland, in France, in Africa, in Canada, for example, they will say, no, I'm not able to do it. So what you see from Dutch-speaking criminology, that we move to other languages, to English and to French, but you don't see it in the southern part of Belgium. Sometimes they do publish in English, but it's quite limited, due to the fact, of course, that la francophonie, it's a reality. You have a lot of countries where French is one of the official languages, so they can support and they can also survive with that language as a scientific language. Yeah, but it's an handicap for the older criminological research. It was the same in the Netherlands. I remember as a student, you had famous Dutch criminologists, for example, Hoefnagels, Bianchi, Hulsman. Sometimes they published in English, but the majority they published was in Dutch.
Yeah.
And this is material which I had as a student. We had that kind of textbooks coming from the Netherlands in Dutch. Being Flemish and knowing French, we also looked into Déviance et Société. We also looked what was happening in France. When we read legal articles, we could do it in the Journal des Tribunaux and so on. So we were looking to the two languages. English the English literature when I was a student was very much influenced by new criminology, radical criminology, critical criminology. Okay, we studied it, but it was not the kind of stuff we were really interested in being students as such.
Yeah, yeah. It's you mentioned Holtzman. He was also very fluent in French. I remember discussing with him.
He was. Yeah,
But he was Dutch, huh?
he was Dutch. Yeah,
Luc
Luc Hulsman was Dutch. So the net.
But Christian de Boist or de Boist.
Christian de Boist.
Okay.
Yeah,
But he was from Belgium.
He was from Belgium, but he was French speaking.
Because with that name, I thought he was Dutch. Okay.
In Liège, for example, we have Georges Kellens.
Yeah.
Kellens, which is a Flemish name. Georges is perfect bilingual. He can read, write, speak in French and in Dutch. And that generation is disappearing. And Flemish criminology is moving to English, and French-speaking criminology, sometimes they try to go into English, but the most comfortable position is in their proper French language.
Yeah, but the fact that there is not a Belgium Journal of Criminology in French, and probably it's not the time to create it, because you can see the difference. Probably you publish in the different languages, and usually the impact comes from the publications in English.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
It's it's a big change that has happened. Lieven, you had something to ask, huh?
No, I was going to add something on the issue of publishing in English. I think we've heard this the story in other countries as well. For example, when we interviewed our German colleagues, people published in German, and the results were also less known out of the German-speaking world. And I think in most European countries, I mean, as far as I can judge based on the previous discussions and interviews we had, is that it's really at the beginning of the 21st century, and especially as Marc said, after the Bologna reform, that we were kind of like obliged. And of course, we should not forget the role of the European Society of Criminology, because before the existence of a European society, there was no common denominator. European criminologists were not really attracted to publishing internationally in, for example, American journals, probably because of the cultural difference. I mean, what American journal would be interested in, for example, a critical study of the Belgian police reform, where people don't even know that Belgium existed. If you talk to a general US citizen, they all know Brussels, but nobody knows Belgium as a country. I mean, so to speak, of course. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but I mean, this is one issue. I think it has challenges, and especially for us in Belgium, I mean, we are obliged to write in English, especially the younger generation. But then on the same time, you lose contact with, and that's also something Marc said, which is, I think, is very important, the unique position of Belgium. We deliver criminologists at different levels, researchers and people working as practitioners. And these practitioners are not interested in reading academic journals in English. No, they want the results, they want accessible papers,
results and methods and tools, and because as a criminologist and you start with a PhD on a high level in the Ministry of Justice or Interior or a big police force, Antwerp or Ghent, they are asking for results, methods, techniques, how you can tackle between brackets a crime problem or something with threats or civilities. And they have a very good background because they are trained on an academic way, but they are not that interested in theoretical issues, theoretical discussions. And sometimes you see some colleagues who are really staying into theory, and theory becomes ideology. And from an ideological point of view, you narrow your research topics, and then you come into discussions. Oh, we are against the decisions taken by the government. Okay, go for an alternative. They didn't do it. They say, no, we are against. And nothing is happening. But due to the fact that criminology is profound in 6 universities, not everyone is thinking on the same position. And especially the youngsters, the students we do form, the researchers, they don't see problems in working for the state, working for private companies, working for local authorities, and so on.
It's interesting what you mentioned also about the criminologists that don't want to have anything to do with the state. It's funny because that critical criminology movement had a lot of impact in South America. Go up there, and it's funny because they all work for the government. They are all judges. They are all prosecutors. Maybe
they are all paid by tax money.
Exactly. Yeah, but as you said, it makes me think a lot of Albert Camus, the Les Justes display that he had, the just, and so they don't mix. We are outside this, we cannot mix, and the problem is still there. It's not because you. It's a kind of moral superiority. This cannot enter, and completely illogical. And
then you become a tribe. And tribal thinking, and you all think on the same way. And as I said, the best expression is la pensée unique. Everyone is repeating what the other one is saying, and there is a kind of control, formal and informal control in those networks, in those clubs as such. And it's opposite of what science should be. Science should be open, free, no taboos in research, and always using your scientific methodology, your scientific freedom, your scientific integrity. But because criminology and also criminal law is that close to state, to power, some of them do not want to be identified with it. But on the other hand, they need money from that same system to do research.
Yeah. No, and it works like a tribe. For example, I wrote something very critical about, especially about the book by Alessandro Barata, and then you become an outcast in that system. But I think there is a movement against that, so it may change. I was thinking about the issue that you mentioned, the language, which is a major issue that you both mentioned. Perhaps this movement towards open access in the publications could change a little bit, because what happened to us, so we published an article about the fact that in several countries that we studied during the lockdowns, there was no increase in femicide, contrary to all expectations. So we published in English, but then our university, University of Lausanne, has these agreements for the open access publication. And if you put it with a Creative Commons license, then you can reproduce it. And so now, because several countries were from Latin America, we publish it also in Spanish. And so one possibility could be, for example, to publish in English, because we know that it has an impact outside the country. But then you have a translation, and this completely legal, without infringing any rule. You can publish them in the national language. In the old days, I mean, you publish, and it was like Faust selling his soul to Mephistopheles. You lost everything. So I don't know, maybe this could be a new trend. I don't know.
I have two small questions that I would like to ask to Marc, which are also related to the European Society of Criminology. It may be that the decline in interest among young criminologists in, for example, the Belgian or the Flemish Society of Criminology, has to do with the pressure of publishing in English and
Yeah.
the fact that people are studying different topics. And if you want to, have contact with other scholars working on the same topic, you need to expand. So I think the European Society played a major role in attracting scholars from diverse universities, which makes us probably pose the question, do we really still need a Flemish or a Belgian society? Probably we need to reflect on it, and it may still have a function, but maybe a different one. I don't know.
Okay, you see it, and it's a very interesting question as well, Lieven. If you want to publish in Dutch, and you're living in the Netherlands, you can go to Delict and Delinquent, Delict and Delinquency. You can go to Justitiële Verkenningen. You can go for the tijdschrift over cultuur en criminaliteit, more on cultural criminology. If you want to publish something in Dutch in Belgium, you can go to Panopticon. We have specialized journals still in Dutch, sometimes bilingual with French. Cahiers inlichtingenstudies, cahiers d'études de renseignement. Sometimes we do see English publications in. So as long as those journals do exist, yeah, it's good to start, or it's good to have typical Belgian, French publication in your own language. On the other hand, when you have European Journal of Criminology, it's broad. It is different topics. It's well published. There is a rhythm in it. You know when the journal will come, which is not that often the case. Sometimes in other journals, or sometimes you see, okay, it's less than before. So I think you do have the impact of the ESC, but also the impact of the proper journal of the ESC. And for youngsters, especially if they do want to have research funding or starting with a PhD or an academic career, one is counting the impact. And if you publish in English, your impact is much broader and higher than you do it in your proper language. But for me, it's the same if you publish in Italian, in Spanish, in German, in Portuguese, in Serbian language. But there is still need, in my opinion, to have criminological research in the own languages.
My impression is that it's not so much the journals, because these journals that you mentioned, they are not so easy to access from outside Belgium.
No, it's true.
They are not online, but if people put the PDF online, on especially, for example, ResearchGate or academia.edu, I realized that this gives some visibility, which goes beyond what the journal can offer. It's the same phenomena with YouTube. Now someone can put a song in YouTube and then became famous without publishing. And I realized mainly because in the 90s, when I was studying, I wrote something about the bilingualism in a novel by Julio Cortázar, the writer, and Marel, it's Rayuela, it's this novel from the 1960s. And then I scanned it and put it on ResearchGate and also in Academia Edu, and now it's being quoted, and I never wrote. That is something about literature. It's very specific about the fact that he was using different languages, and this gives a lot of visibility. It's like the way in which things are working is changing, and some people say, okay, use this, I don't know, word of science to search for the articles, but there is another way of distributing the research.
And I think the same is true for books. If you publish a book, a monograph in your own language, your market is limited, especially for language we are using, Dutch language. The Netherlands do speak it, the northern part of Belgium. You have the Caribbean, some isles in the Caribbean, Suriname, and that's it. It's if you do write in German language, okay, East Europe is following, but that's it. Italian is the same. It's not the case for Spanish because you have Spain, you have South America, you have the Spanish influence of the language in North America. So
Yeah.
this is a world language. Still,
Also there, in Spanish, if you do not put it online, if you go to a local publication, it's much more difficult. But now the internet is giving this possibility of reaching a global audience, which, for Spanish, because it's very well, it's 500 million people, and it can have a major impact. That's true.
I remember my period in working on my PhD. I had to go by car from Antwerp to Freiburg to the Max Planck Institute to copy, to take a book and to on a copy machine and to make some copy. Today, and it's good or it's bad, but I'm still from the tradition. I love books. I need to have a book. For me, the book is the real thing. Nevertheless, if you can go search and very fast search on the internet, and you have the articles as such, but we needed to do more efforts in order to get knowledge. Go to another university, go to another country in order to have that publication in that kind of language. And today, those who control or try to put a certain knowledge up front, you Google, and this is the first article you see, okay, you take it for granted.
Yeah.
In the past, you really needed to go in the indexes of the journals in what is interesting me.
Yeah, that also changed the role of the Max Planck also in criminology.
Yeah.
In one interview, I don't remember, Lieven, if it was the interview that Martin made with us, or if it is in something that he wrote for a book about the history of the European source book. I don't remember, but he mentioned that the Max Planck lost a lot of its influence because of the fact that the library became less important.
And there's also a big danger. I mean, people forget about their history. They think if it's not online, that it doesn't exist. So they get really a very strange idea about the history
that's
of criminology in the country. So this is something that we should really take into account. This is really a challenge for, future libraries. Criminological libraries. A good combination, the balance between online and offline offering of books and journals, something really we should reflect upon, because we cannot just get rid of all books. They're a collective history.
But also, I think for the journals, the journals that you mentioned, to scan the old copies and put them online, that would be a good idea, because then otherwise you are always, for the American journal, for the journals from the United States, to speak properly, this has been done. Now you can access almost articles that were impossible to find. But in Europe, this has not been the case yet.
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, but Panopticon has started this. Was one of the first. That's also something that few people know, but the journal started in 1980, and we can access all
it's all online. That's good.
Yeah.
Because, for example, la Revue Internationale de Criminologie de Police Technique et Scientifique, which is the journal of the ICLF, the association that you mentioned. It is only now that because this is a very old.
It's a very old one.
Immediately after World War II, because Switzerland could produce, was a neutral country, so they could produce, and there are several things that were lost there and only now will be available. The Swiss Journal of Criminology, Bulletin de Criminologie, they are now going to scan it, because as Lieven mentioned, the new generations, if it's not online, never. So you live this change, and when you were studying criminology, how many students you were?
In my group we were with 12. and if you compare that to groups today, what is the advantage of that group of 12? Some of them stayed in academia, others as very high-ranking positions in the police system or in the justice system. And the generations coming just before me, just behind me, these are the leading generations today. If you wanted to go into academia, or if you wanted to go in interior justice, as so on, take for example Philip Willikens, he's a director general, very high ranking in the interior, and it's that generation trained in that way. But we are not so good in doing proper research. We never learned it. We were working with books, we were working with articles, we could do interviews or try to observe. We never had, as I said, statistics, all kind of qualitative or quantitative research methods. And today I think there is more research on a scientific way. You also see it on the theoretical level. Today, if you read criminological theory, and in the past it was, oh, that's influential. Today you read it and you say, okay, is this true, or is this just an idea, what is over there? That's something I learned from Lieven, that Lieven said, yeah, Marc, you can test theories with proper scientific techniques, and what they wrote, is it right or wrong? So I think that's a good evolution. And in the past, it was really, on textbooks, ideas, with a limited research, sometimes one case study, and on that one case study, they created a theory. And that's good in the evolution of science today, that you, from a scientific point of view, are more critical. In the past, it was often critical from an ideological point of view. Whether you liked the theory or you didn't like the theory, and they said it's right or wrong. Today in criminology, you can test the theory. You can say, okay, it's an idea, but it's not a real scientific theory. It's a way of looking to reality as such. And that's also a change in criminology today.
Yeah, so that's it's quite interesting, this change that you mentioned. Yeah. Because when you studied, you were 12, and that was a postgraduate degree, or was
undergraduate law, and then you could stay in your law studies. We could switch to criminology. You could switch to diplomatic studies. You could switch to communication studies and so on. So the majority did stay in law because they wanted to be lawyers or they wanted to be magistrates. But those who opted for criminology were more looking for a police system, intelligence, prison system. So it was a very narrow group, those very moments. And the real shift, and I think it was Leuven who took the initiative to start with the kandidaturen and with the undergraduate. Yeah, and Ghent followed and Brussels followed. And then you have that famous case Dutroux in Belgium in '96, and boom, it boomed as such. Now we need to correct some things to the new students coming in. We are not teaching police sciences. We are not going to teach you how to solve a murder. And sometimes youngsters do think, oh, criminology, I can go into the police system. I can go in CSI issues. So we are making the shift and trying to stress on the academic and the university education you get at university. And it's not an applied science that we are going to teach you. If you are interested in that, do something on a bachelor level, on a professional bachelor level, which can be useful if you want to go into the police system and to be really in the field or in the operations.
Yeah. So it means that in Belgium you already had this system of undergraduate and graduate. It was more like Anglo-Saxon system.
Kandidaturen, licenties, more based on the French system. Les candidatures the licence, and the doctorate as it existed.
Ah, you already had these 3 steps because it was not the case in other countries.
No. We had kandidaturen, licenties, doctoraat.
It was 3 years and 2 old.
No, two.
2 + 2.
And now it's became 3 + 1.
But it's interesting. I would like to ask your opinion. I'm going to ask this question to all the Belgian criminologists we are going to interview. The huge amount of criminology students. I mean, you mentioned 12 when you were studying criminology. So the first undergraduate year has about 600 students. I mean, this creates pressure. But this is only the case in the Flemish part of the country, because in the French part, they don't have a bachelor program. They just have a 2-year master program. And, I mean, this is just a personal question, but I can imagine that both systems have advantages and disadvantages.
Yeah.
But what do you think about this? Does it have an advantage to have a 2-master program without a bachelor program? Or do you think the Flemish situation has more advantages than disadvantages? It's a difficult one. I mean,
it's a very good question, Lieven, because when I was a student, the group of 12, the majority studied law, but there were also people coming from psychology, from sociology, and in order to institutionalize and to make criminology more known, we as students already said, yeah, we need an undergraduate level. And because we were with a very small, limited group, at the very moment it became a reality. My generation, and it was also the case at Ghent and everywhere, said, oh, it's a good idea to have the undergraduate. Nowadays, when you also see the shift in the contents of the science in itself, the scientific stream in criminology, now you can ask yourself the question, is it really necessary to have that kind of undergraduate? Because you can learn it in other sciences as such. And let's see a master's degree in criminology really as a specialization as such. So it's a movement. We were partisans for, we need undergraduate students because we will have more criminologists. Criminology will have more impact in society. But now you can think and rethink the opposite of it. One of the topics Ghent University decided, together with Rotterdam University, for example, is to have a research master, to train the very good students who are interested in order to prepare very good research and very good PhDs.
Yeah, I think it's an important, a very difficult question, because I can see advantages as well. And only offering a master program, you don't need to teach the basics. You can try to attract, for example, you mentioned there are no or almost no scholars, students with an economic background. You can attract them. They don't need to learn the basics. They can just move on, and they have their methodological training. Maybe in this time window of growing interdisciplinarity, this might be something for the future. Of course, I sometimes doubt because of the other reasons.
But it is a major issue that you're raising, because when you look, if you look at other countries, for example, in Spain, you know, I taught there for 5 years, from 2000 to 2005, and then I continued, but only part-time in Barcelona. And when I was there was a huge discussion. At that time, there was each university could propose criminology, was the title of the university. Then there was the possibility of creating a license, and then they created what they call it, say, a bachelor, an undergraduate, and a graduate, and it's 4 years. Because the system is, they took the system of law is 4+1. But for example, the market in Spain is very linked to the public market, and people want to work for the state, and so they want to pass this what they call opposition, which is in French is le concours, to enter in the, and they don't have concourses for criminologists. So there's a huge discussion because they also have a lot of students, but the outcome is not clear. I have the impression that in Belgium you have much more people going to the private system because the state is not absorbing all that.
No. And the private, it can be the real private security as such, but you also do find criminologists in private business world, people in HR departments, people doing other stuff, but in the real business. On the other hand, you also see people go to the very big accountancy businesses, Ernst & Young, PricewaterhouseCoopers. There is a trend that criminologists can go to the private sector as such. I think the majority still opts for the police, but they already know when they are 18 years old, they already know, I want to become a police officer. Okay, and then criminology is a very good scientific.
Because you have a way of joining the police department with a university degree.
Yeah. It's possible. It's difficult, but it's possible. You can enter on a higher position, but most criminologists don't do it. They start at a lower position because they go that fast in their career, and at least they learned the proper police job on the field. In the past, to work into a prison system, it were all criminologists and or psychologists. Today, you see a lot of criminologists moving into the penal system. Also on the level of magistrates, you have criminologists working for the public prosecutor's office. So we do have a lot of students, we do have a lot of research, we do have a lot of professors, but there is a labor market for criminologists.
But this is a very interesting outcome of this interview, because for the people, I think it could be a model also in Portugal, also introduced in 2002, already licensed, and then also the undergraduate and graduate, and so it is the private market should enter there, and maybe people should be prepared to go to the market, because we had also the discussion in Switzerland. So it's either you create the program and then they will find the jobs, or you try to create the job and then and then produce. It's like the egg and the chicken.
That's the reason how France is reacting. There is no labor market for criminologists, so criminology doesn't exist, and if it exists, we should not invest in it. But the opposite.
Yeah, but the Belgium example, this is concrete, empirical. You did it like that, and it worked. I don't know if this was organized, that you thought already about the private companies, but it worked, and it's concrete,
Yeah. It was not organized, it's more the spontaneous ordering of things. And when you offer something on the other side, there can be a demand for it. So we also see it in the mid-80s, 90s, a demand from the private security industry for criminologists, because there were criminologists who were willing to go into the private business.
That I think is the major outcome of this discussion. And of course, now that you have 400 students, I don't think you can go back to, or maybe the university will change in the future. But it is quite interesting. I think when we discussed also with Ernesto Savona in Italy, they also paid a lot of attention to but that is particularly to the studies that they do at that university's Sacred Heart of Milano, not everywhere else. But it shows a way for criminologists. It is there. I saw it also in the Ghent conference. All these private companies support.
Yeah, they were there. And,
it was clear, and it was not understood by everyone when it happened.
No. Some of them.
I really learned a lot today. Yeah. You know what I'm talking about. So but I really learned a lot from this discussion. Really a lot. I don't know, Lieven, if you have still another question.
No, I think we had a chance to have an in-depth talk. All the topics were discussed, and we were able to ask additional questions on each and every topic. I think people have a very in-depth knowledge, at least. They will have learned things that are probably not so famous for non-Belgian criminologists about the situation in Belgium. So I think we've made a very interesting contribution here, Marc. So I'd like to thank you very much for your time and efforts to answer all our questions. I know it's a lot of work and not so easy done, but it's much appreciated.
Thank you.
So thanks a lot.
I was honored by the question of Marcelo where you live. And I also made the fact that I'm already getting that old that I can reflect on the history.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for following Lieven and Marcelo's Criminology podcast. This podcast is edited by Eduardo Coco from the University of Lausanne. Our theme song is Seagull's Night, Noche de Gaviotas, composed by Gustavo Cantero, arranged by Tato Germano, and played by Tato and Gustavo with the voices of Sasha Conte and Alejandro Turco Guyot. Your host are Lieven Pauwels from Ghent University, Belgium, and Marcelo Evi from the University of Lausanne, Switzerland. Cheers, and see you soon.